Your stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting. We share stories for many reasons, to persuade, to entertain, to connect. What we sometimes forget is the impact of the stories we tell ourselves. Whether you're sharing personal stories or business stories, how you share them makes a difference in how you remember them and in how you're perceived by the people you're interacting with. When you figure out which stories to share, difficult bosses and coworkers, successes, failures, the next step is to develop how you share them. Have you figured out your patterns, your roles in those successes, the discomfort, and your challenges? In this series, you'll hear stories that will resonate with you. You'll nod your head in understanding, and then we'll dig into the lessons from each of those. How many times have you been sharing a story only to be interrupted by a person eager to share his own? When I'm working with clients on communication skills, I remind them to listen for understanding, not to respond. But during this podcast, I'm asking you to listen and consider your own related stories, to listen and consider which stories in your life might have impacted you in a similar way. I'm so excited to introduce my guest today on Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. Sherrie Dunlevy and I met on Facebook through a group that we're both a member of, and neither of us had really interacted until I saw a post, responded to it, and Sherrie reached out to me and said, "Oh my gosh, we need to talk. And I'm so glad we did, and we've emailed back and forth a few times, but this is our first time actually having a voice conversation. So Sherrie, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, Sarah, thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
So I always ask my guests the first question, which is to tell us something about yourself that most people don't know. And the reason I ask that question at the beginning of every podcast is we end up getting into some pretty personal conversation, personal stories. And I love for our podcast listeners to be able to have some context for those stories and feel connected with the guest in a different way than would normally be connected.
For the people that my background is a television news anchor, radio talk show host, and now I'm a speaker. And so the thing that most people don't know about me is that I am truly introverted.
Oh, goodness.
For leading such a public life, I am a true introvert.
So that's how you recover after you've done something really public. What do you do when you walk away from something that I know for introverts, being in a big crowd or doing something out of your comfort zone particularly really takes a lot out of you, and you have to recharge somehow. So what do you do?
This is how I know it's successful or not, is if I come home totally exhausted, I know that I've given it my all.
Yes.
That's how I know that, wow, it went really well, because I'm physically exhausted. What I mean by introversion is I crave deep connection and conversation. Put me at a cocktail party or a mixer where it's all small talk. It's very challenging for me to connect with someone and really, feel their energy. That's what I mean by that. I love digging deep. I don't like the superficial. And how I recover from that really is just coming home to my haven. I have my 11-pound poodle on my lap as we're talking right now. Maybe a good book, and maybe a nap. It might be something as simple as a nap.
So when you've had your chance to kind of decompress and unwind a little, how do you process what happened? Because I find that is really more for me, that's the difference between an introvert and an extrovert. It's how you recharge afterward, and also how you process, because I find that extroverts have a tendency to need to process out loud right away. Mm-hmm. And that's why when they are recharging, it's not walking away and taking a nap or petting a pet or quietly listening to music or going for a walk, which is what I do.
Yeah.
They tend to need to be around at least one person away from where they were so that they can process fully what happened. So how do you process? When do you process?
I walk a lot of times in the,
Mm-hmm.
there's two places where I really process a lot almost daily: in the shower and when I'm in front of the makeup mirror, when I'm putting makeup on. Because I'm
Huh.
so concentrated in what I'm doing that the thought, I'm able to process all of this. It just comes to me. I do make a practice of, it's not long, but meditation. I call it my divine download. Nothing
Mm-hmm.
usually comes then when I want it to,
Right.
processes when it comes. So I always picture the light shining, the divineness coming into me, and then it will come out when it needs to come out.
That's really interesting. But you give it that space first without the expectation that
Right.
it's going to come to you. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of mix up mindfulness with quiet time.
Mm-hmm.
Is that with quiet time, I think we can often allow those thoughts to come into our heads and actually inspire. But I think with mindfulness, it's more about giving yourself that space without any expectation.
Right.
So,
I really do
yeah.
picture it as a download or a
Hmm.
recharge, like you're
Or an
charging
upload.
your battery or both. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how I picture it. And, you don't get all the information comes, but it doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily process at that time. And that's okay.
Right.
Hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah. The
And
space is
some
right.
right. And sometimes it takes weeks or months even to fully process something that happened. And there are those of us that end up revisiting a conversation over and over and over, trying to process and trying to figure out what went wrong or what went right. And I think sometimes that ends up being really more damaging than
Hmm.
just letting it be what it was. But yeah, it's all a part of that internal processing that we do. Fascinating. I'm
It's
always
so funny
curious
because,
about that.
yeah, I've just been seeing lately a lot of things about just let it go, just let it go, and it will come back the way it needs to.
Yeah, that's so much easier said than done, though.
It
And
is.
I think people who say that generally aren't as self-reflective. If somebody can say, "Oh, just let it go," it makes me think, "Okay, you don't think like I do, and you can't expect that kind of advice to work with everyone because people process things so differently."
Yes.
So I always encourage people to figure out how they process things and then figure out how to adjust that process to be able to be more positive as opposed to, well, do it this way because no.
It's not a one
Just
size fits all. I mean, life is
no.
not a one size fits all, obviously.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when I started reading through some of what you're putting out there through your website and what you do in your speaking, one thing that struck me about it was that it's not just about inspiring people and making them feel good and inspiring them to think more positively. It's really about inspiring people to take action. And I think there's a huge part of social media that's totally missing the boat. And it kind of drives me crazy. And even when I do a keynote, I feel like there's something missing when there's nothing to go afterward to sustain that level of inspiration and action and forward thinking ideas that you actually do. And so one of the things that has been driving me crazy on LinkedIn is a lot of this inspirational talk, and memes and talking about how to be inspired and how to be a better person and all of that. But I don't see people following up with action.
That's so
And
yeah.
I do strengths finders. I'm a certified coach, and I have activator up in my top 5. So that's something that has always been with me when people are talk, 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 yammer, 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 but they don't actually do anything. And it drives me up a wall. So tell me a story about a time that something inspired you and you took the next step and maybe why that particular thing worked.
Well, it's funny that you should say this because I love inspirational memes. And what I try to do, I call myself an inspirationista. Um, And what I do is try to take that meme that I saw and craft it to my own interpretation that might break it down into a way of looking at something a little bit differently. And what what I'm working on right now is a book from all of the memes that I've taken from social media and done the inspirationista twist on it, and then follow it up with action steps.
Awesome. This is your book that you're getting ready to publish?
That I'm in the process of writing as we speak. So when you were talking about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. But I think that why we don't take it's easy. You can, there's actually one, I think it's by Darren Hardy. It said you can read all the inspirational quotes that you want to, but if you don't take any action, it's not going to do you any good. You know,
right?
And
makes you feel good for a moment.
You feel good, but it's not about feeling good. It's about bringing your best. That's an action word, you know? I mean, it takes action. And so what I feel my role in the world is to learn what I can, share what I learn, and inspire others to bring out the best that they can. That's how I think the world works the best. You know, when we develop ourselves into the person that we're supposed to be, if everyone did that, literally, that would be utopia.
So tell me about when you had a moment like that where you realized that, yeah, you were inspired, but you had to take the next step. Can you think of a specific story where that happened? Because, well, let me give you an example. The No Longer Virtual Conference coming up in 4 weeks. When the trigger for me, I had been in contact with these LinkedIn people for years and just had learned so much from them. The trigger for me was a conversation with a guy named Karthik Rajan. And we had gone back and forth via LinkedIn for a couple of years and never talked on the phone. Picked up the phone and we talked. And I was so excited about this call that when his phone number came up and I saw his name come up on my phone when he called me, I literally started to blush like a celebrity was calling me. I was so excited. I got this big smile on my face. We talked for an hour and a half. And in that hour and a half, I was so inspired by his encouragement of what I was putting out there, the writing I was doing, the connecting I was doing on LinkedIn and that particular platform. And it was a Friday afternoon. Sunday morning, I woke up totally on fire thinking, I have to get all these people together face to face. Because if I'm learning this much from them online, I know I can learn so much more from them face to face. So literally, it was a Sunday morning. I woke up on fire. And 2 weeks later, I had an agenda and 10 facilitators volunteering to come to this event and facilitate sessions. 2 weeks. And a week after that, I had a contract with the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Atlanta for my site.
That's
so
incredible.
Yeah, it was one of those, okay, I'm inspired, but what am I going to do with it?
Right.
And I couldn't not do something with it. So tell me about that time when you're like, oh my gosh, I can't not do something with this.
Right. Well, it just happened a couple of months ago. As I said, I put out inspirational stories and videos out on social media a lot. And one day I got this message from this woman in Africa. And she was telling me how somehow she found me and that she was so inspired by what I was doing that she wondered if it was okay if I mentored her. And she said that she mentors women and girls in Uganda to stay in school because a lot of them leave school because they're on their menstrual cycle. At the same time, at the same time, I'm learning about all this for the first time, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I've got to help Millie. I've got to try to find something. At the same time, another woman messages me, and she says, will you help my niece? She's starting a Kickstarter, And she is working with like Tom's Shoes, how you buy a pair and they send a pair over.
Uh-huh.
She's coming up with a panty company that she is going to sell panties in the US, but then match it with period-proof panties to send over to Africa to keep women and children in school. And I'm thinking, I've got to do something. I've got to do something now. And it's so funny because I have been planning on doing not a podcast, but a series of shows on social media featuring ordinary people who choose to live in an extraordinary way. And I just kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And finally it was like, this is it. I mean, how much more validation, inspiration, how much more the universe to smack you upside the head. You need to do the interview. And so I did this interview, and it was so cool because I had people from all over the world that was watching, and they made the Kickstarter. I mean, they earned money. So I'm really excited about that. Now, it wasn't because of me, but I helped. And it forced me to get out of my head of how's this going to happen, all the minutia that hold you back from doing it.
Exactly.
And it's just like, no, we got to get this done. Kickstarters have a deadline, and she was down to like a week left. So, it was, we got to get going. Let's roll. And that's what we did. So I guess that would be one of those.
That is a perfect story to describe that. I mean, that's a perfect example of some connecting the dots and being aware of how these things connect with each other. Luckily, I mean, that was so straightforward. It was like, okay, I get this call from this woman, and then I get this call from, it was your niece. Is that what you're?
No, it was a woman in Africa who just found me. And then it was a woman, a pastor from a nearby town who said, could you help my niece?
Oh, okay. It was your pastor's niece. Okay. But when those things happen, I think it's so much more obvious that we need to take action. And yet people still don't, because they have the fear of failure or some other excuse. And generally, I think it's a fear of failure. But what I'm finding is that most of the time when people are actually inspired to take action, it is something hitting them upside the head. And it's usually negative. I mean, that was a perfect example of being open to your opportunities that land in your lap. Those landed in your lap over 48 hours.
Yes.
And it's magical when that happens. There are other times, though, that something really negative happens that awakens you to needing to do something. So I bet you have one of those.
I do. In 1999, my husband and I lost our second son. And we were really loved through that time and supported through that time. But at the same time, there were like 3 people that were very close to us that just kind of disappeared out of our life. So it was like a double loss. It was very painful at the time, trying to figure it out, but really don't have a lot of time to dwell there. I have a 3-year-old at home. I lived a very public life. I was a television news anchor at the time. And it was a few years later, after I had time to process this and after I had a lot of time to heal, that I just kept thinking, my gosh, I wonder what that was about. So I figured 3 things. My brain came up with 3 things. It was because if this either hit them too close to home, like I can't go there because I can't even imagine if I had to lose one of my children, which one it would, it's unimaginable. Okay. Yeah. So you just can't even go close to it because it's too painful to even think about. The second one is that, maybe someone didn't know what to do or what to say. They just really didn't know. Or it could be, they thought they want to do something, but oh my gosh, what if I make them cry more? What if I make it worse instead of better?
Right.
And
exactly.
so I thought, my gosh, if there was only some kind of resource out there for these people, then maybe they could save friendships. Maybe they wouldn't have to lose friends. And as I was talking to people, and I had since retired from TV at that time, as I was talking to people, I thought, I found this was common when you got divorced. People disappeared out of your life. You get diagnosed with cancer. people disappear out of your life.
Mhm.
You lose your job. People disappear out of your life. There's so many things.
The people you least expect to walk
Yes.
away, and the people that you would least expect to step up are the ones that show up at your
Yes.
doorstep with
Yes.
food.
It's
I
amazing,
know.
isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So I kept thinking, if there was just some kind of resource out there, and every time I Google it, every time I walk into a Barnes and Noble, every time that, I'd go on Amazon, I never found what I was looking for. And I literally, I just kept hearing, look all you want, but you're not going to find it because you're the one that's supposed to write it. And I'm just like, that's just like crazy. Most writers want to write. They dream of writing. That's what they're called to do. I've never felt called to write a book, but it wouldn't go away. It just would not go away. What I've come to realize through the years is the more you're called to do something and you ignore the call, it's just going to keep coming back up. So you may as well
Exactly.
step out and answer it before the
Mm-hmm.
universe has to smack you upside the head in a negative way. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
it was kind of like, because of the death of my son, I realized this, was aware of this problem, really didn't do anything about it, but kept trying to figure it out like a puzzle. And then all of a sudden it's like, you've got to do this. And so when I finally decided to say yes and do it, I literally made the declaration public so that I was forced to continue.
Yeah.
If
Keep
someone
yourself
stopped,
accountable.
if
Mm-hmm.
someone stopped me in the grocery store and said, "Hey, how's that book coming?" I had to say
Mm-hmm.
something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what pushed me through it. And then I had to realize that I had to be detached from the outcome.
Right.
Whatever was going to happen was going to happen, but I did it. And what's so funny, you're talking about fear, is so then I wrote the book and then I put it on the shelf for a couple of years because I thought, okay, wrote it, universe wrote it, God wrote it, I wrote the book. And it was like, what the hell do you think you're doing? You've got more to do. You've got to get it out there. You've got to let people know about it. And that can be a vulnerable thing, the fear of what are people going to
Absolutely.
think? Like, what's she doing writing a book? And what makes her think that she's an expert? And I wasn't an expert. What they didn't realize is that I was able to use my ability as a reporter to go out and get the information from other people. So this isn't just me. This is other people's information.
Mm-hmm.
But you have that fear of judgment, that fear of failure, all those stupid little fears. And that's why I had to detach myself from it, because I knew that it was something that I needed to do. I knew it was something that I had to step up and do. I knew that it was something that was not in this world and needed to be in this world. So if not me, then who?
Right.
Did I answer that okay for you?
Yes, that was exactly the kind of story I was thinking, is that sometimes faced with tragedy or trauma, you have to do something, you have to take the action, and that inspiration isn't going to do it all by itself.
Right.
You have to do something with it. And whether it's that immediate, for me, on fire, I have to do this right now, or whether it's that slow burn of, this is something that happened, this is something that I need to do, but I don't really want to do. And I think that's more often the case when it comes to having that inspiration actually generate action and change. It's the slow burn. If you look at long marriages that end, my parents were married for 26 years before they divorced.
Wow.
And that's not unusual. It's either 2 to 4 years or it's 15 to 20 years. There's not much in between there. And what ends up happening is it's that slow burn. It's the slow, I'm dissatisfied, but not dissatisfied enough to do something about it. And what is that quote? You have to, it has to make you more uncomfortable to stay than the prospect of leaving.
Right.
Or change versus not changing. And I guess it will be great to see your book when it eventually comes out, about taking action on those inspirations that you receive. And it would also be interesting to hear more about people that do make that change, and maybe looking back when they should have, where they waited longer than maybe they should have. And that's only something that an individual
Right.
can decide. I don't like the word should.
Right.
I avoid it at all costs because it sounds condescending and judgmental. And I just, oh, yuck. But at the
Mhm.
same time, I think we have to look back. For instance, I think about one of the jobs that I had where I was definitely being abused by my boss, and it was a terrible fit. And I stayed for 2.5 years because I was looking for another job. I didn't feel like I could leave without having something to go to. And now I look back and I think it would have benefited me and maybe even my boss had I said, I'm not tolerating this behavior. And either say that to her and change it or say it to her and leave. Because
Yeah.
I put myself through so much and I didn't like myself. Partway through that, I started to realize that I was being mean. I was talking behind her back. I was falling into that mud with her of, and I realized I don't like myself when I'm like this. This isn't me. So I know that certain issues that happened should have been my trigger to say, no.
Well, that's what I talk about when I'm talking to a lot of people, because when I was going through the journey of losing my son, I was in a career that I didn't want to be in anymore. I was Sherrie McCutcheon. I had been Sherrie McCutcheon on the air for 15 years, and then I got pregnant with my son, and I didn't love my job. Well, I didn't like my job. I didn't like it at all, but I was too afraid to leave because I didn't know who I was going to be if I wasn't a television news anchor.
Right. Your identity was all wrapped up in it.
Right. And so then I lose my son, right? And then so I went back to work like 2 weeks after I lost him because I didn't know how to be Sherrie Dunlevy, the mother, grieving mother, but I knew how to be Sherrie McCutcheon, the news anchor. Now,
Mhm.
how did that work out for me? It didn't. It was ridiculous, right?
Right.
I would cry on the air. I needed to leave. But it was really, honestly, I was going through therapy from my grief where I had to get permission from someone else to say, it's okay, leave. How pathetic is that, right? That you get to that point, and then
I
I
wouldn't
look
call it
back.
pathetic.
Hmm?
That's not the Pathetic is not the word that popped into my head.
Real
Common.
well,
Common.
yeah,
It's not the
well,
same thing.
I just think, my gosh, why couldn't I have been strong enough to leave when I knew this wasn't the right fit? And
Hmm.
you're right. How many times do we stay in marriages or situations or whatever? And now I dropped the McCutcheon completely because that was a comfort zone for me. That's why I left my broadcasting career, because it was a comfort zone with me. I made a decision at age 50 when this book was coming out, when all this was, I have to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's why people don't change, because
Hmm.
they don't want to be uncomfortable. And anything you want to do is uncomfortable.
Hmm.
Anything that you want to change, because change is uncomfortable. Our brains are wired to say it's fine to make when you want to diet. Well, why can't you have that cake? Everybody else in the lunchroom's having cake because it's Sarah's birthday. You're going to offend her if you don't have cake. It will
Hmm.
do anything to pull you back from changing the behavior and the way that you really want to be, which is healthy, fit, whatever. So it doesn't matter what
Hmm.
kind of change you want to be. Your natural human instinct tries to draw you back from that change and trap you into everything's fine.
Hmm.
Everything's fine.
And that is, from what I understand, the reading that I've done and the doctors that I've known in the past, they've said that it often takes a life changing medical issue for people to take that step and make it real, whether it's to lose weight or to exercise to improve your heart health. And by the way, there's a big difference between being skinny and being fit.
Right.
And it does take, for me, it was one of those things. I realized I wanted to be able to keep up with my boys. I was always small. I'm just fortunate that way. Genetically, I'm small. But the reality was that if I wanted to keep up with the boys, I was going to have to do more than just eat well. I had to exercise. I had to start doing what I could do to keep my body fit. But that was my aha moment, was running after one of my boys and running out of breath and
Mm-hmm.
realizing, okay, skinny's not the same as fit.
Right.
Yeah, but the other thing that I keep coming back to is, I think for some people, and I've talked about this in previous episodes of the podcast and a lot of the blogging I've done. For some people, the equation comfort equals happiness actually works. And where I see dissatisfaction, they may not see that because they feel comfortable and so they're happy. And I look at that as a person that is constantly in transition. It's where I live. I live there,
Yes.
and
Yes.
I thrive in transition. It's when I do my best work. So that comfort does not equal happiness for me. As a matter of fact, if I'm comfortable, I have a tendency to self-sabotage because I get bored.
Yeah.
But I always feel like we need to be aware that there are people out there that are different from us, that comfort equals satisfaction equals happiness, even if what we see from the outside is dissatisfaction.
Right.
They have to make that choice. They have to say, this comfort isn't also the same as being satisfied.
As long as that's the truth and not a story that they're telling themselves. One of the things
Right.
that when I speak to, especially women, is, we're supposed to be, gratitude plays a great part in our lives. And you can be grateful and happy for everything that you have in your life. That doesn't mean that you should be condemned for wanting more.
Right.
Wanting more doesn't mean that displaces all the gratitude for what you have now. And
That's a great point.
we think it's either or. If I'm happy with what I have now, then I shouldn't want more. Well, that doesn't even make sense.
Well, we can qualify the word more, and it may not be more. It may be something
Yes,
else.
yes,
Like
yes.
when I left my job as a public affairs person, it wasn't because I wanted more of anything in terms of money or more recognition or anything like that. I wanted different. I wanted something that really challenged me. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted something that, when I did it, it felt rewarding to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not necessarily more, because when people think more, generally, well, my impression is that they're thinking money and status. And what about more satisfaction in life? What about more challenge? What about more um, working within my strengths so that I can be more rewarded extrinsically and intrinsically?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think more is a really important aspect of that conversation. Is it that you want more, or is it that you want different? Because
Different.
maybe we can separate that gratitude from the more.
Right.
This just kind of popped into my head. This is kind of random. What do you think?
Um, I don't know. That's a very good point. I need to think on that. It could be something, maybe something else.
Yes.
I just remember a woman that we have, my son and her daughter in the same class, and she said to me, "You just never seem satisfied. Why can't you just be happy with how things are? And why do you? I just that amazes me about you." And so it was like that I was, and I thought, well, you don't just stop once your kids are gone. Once your kids are grown, what? You're left with what? And I always say, I'm not going to put on my kitty cat sweatshirt and stretch pants and wait for the grandkids to come on.
Right.
I'm just not going to do that.
Right.
I happen to feel that, we're created with these different gifts, talents, and abilities, that our job is to hone those gifts and then share those gifts.
Exactly.
And you're never done. You're never done.
Right. And I think there's a big danger to that sense of I'm satisfied with where I am and who I am, because I think what ends up happening is there's an underlying dissatisfaction simply because as humans, we are born to feel relevant. We always want some sense of relevance. What are we doing here? That's why those age-old questions exist. Why do I exist? Why am I here? Who am I really? And as long as people tell themselves the story that they're satisfied with where they are, they're the way that this shows up in my experience is that they seek relevance in the wrong places. So for instance, here in the town where I live, there was a water rights case against the city. Somebody was suing the city for water rights,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a 20-year thing, 20 years. And the man that filed the suit had recently retired. And when I started to get to know this man, he's a nice man. He really is not mean or selfish or greedy. What I realized is that he wanted to feel relevant. And because his identity was wrapped up in his job, and then he retired, he filled that gap, that need to feel relevant, by keeping this lawsuit going, not accepting any offers to settle. It was like this constant thing because he could walk into the building where I worked and everyone knew who he was.
Mm-hmm.
But it ended up, to me, that was really negative. People really didn't like him because they didn't understand it and because it seemed greedy.
Mm-hmm.
To the outsiders looking in, it was like, this is costing taxpayers money. This long-term suit.
Keep you feeling
hours,
relevant.
yes, just to make you feel relevant. And I think if he knew that, he might have taken a different tactic. So our friends that we hear saying, why are you constantly seeking? You seem like you're dissatisfied. It's not dissatisfaction necessarily. It's that desire to continue to grow and be relevant and taken in a positive way, as opposed to, I know some women who do that by being really helicoptery with their grown children.
Yes.
Or they find relevance in dragging up drama and gossip wherever they are.
I know.
Because it helps them feel relevant.
Isn't it hard? Isn't it more challenging to be around those types of people now?
Oh, I won't do it. I won't do it anymore.
Yeah.
I just won't. And sometimes I'll actually say something, there's just too much drama here. I love you. And we'll see each other sometimes, but I can't spend a lot of time with you because there's just too much drama here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that retirement mentality of you're done. And, and you said where people are. Well, life's always changing. Life's always evolving. So there never is a where you are, because right where you are now is changing in the next second and the next second and the next second. Mm-hmm. So, the thought of me ever retiring, what does that even mean? I want to be evolving and growing always. Maybe I'll change jobs and leave this job and retire from this job, but I'm not going to just stop my life, sit in a chair and watch Law and Order the rest of my life, reruns.
Right. And some people may choose to do that, and that's certainly their choice, as long as that need for relevance doesn't show up in negative ways in their relationships.
Right.
Yeah.
We all have
it's
choices.
Hard. Yeah, it's hard not to judge.
Yeah. That's my biggest challenge right now. But that's all right. None of us are perfect. So while we might excel on one level, we need still work on the other. So that's okay.
But just acknowledging that change is happening.
Right.
And embracing it to a certain extent, I think is just so important for every person on the planet at this point.
Well, when I had my first son, a woman gave me the best possible piece of advice I think I could have ever had. And because he is an only child now, she said, don't waste your time looking back and wishing that they were a baby or wishing that they were two, because then you're taking time away from where they are right now and enjoying that time with them. And every stage is an awesome, cool stage. And that is so true. I have truly enjoyed the journey with my son. And I really don't look, when I do look back at those home movies, I do get that, oh, but I
Sentimental.
don't stay there because, where we are now is really cool. And we've had a lot of very cool experiences that how would I be able to enjoy him on a trip at 12 when I'm still remembering him at 8 at Disney World? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
it doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. But that was a
And
great,
I think that is awesome advice because if you are seeing them for who they are right now, you get to embrace who
yeah.
they and engage with them at a totally different level. And if you're
Hmm.
living with that regret or wishing they were little again, then you're right. You're totally missing an incredible opportunity to know who they are right now. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of parents kind of lean that direction because they think they know their kid. I think about that a lot when my mom comes to visit, and she does know me very well, but there are some aspects of me that I think she still sees me as a little girl, and this is what you liked. And so you must still like this. This is how you reacted to this. So you're probably going to react to this like that again, even though it's 20 years or 30 years later. And it's hard not to do that. It's really hard not to do that. But again, embracing that knowledge that you're trying,
Hmm.
that you are working on that aspect, I think is a huge step of actually taking action and doing things differently. Wow. we've we've gone a lot of different directions with this conversation, but it all loops back to taking action and making a choice to be inspired by something um, before you have to, before
Right.
it's forced on you.
Right. I remember watching
And
Oprah Winfrey once, and she was talking about how, things start out as a little whisper and then it gets louder and you still don't take action and then it gets to the disastrous stage. And finally you take
mhm,
some action. The heart attack happens, or your husband cheats, or, you get
right.
fired, or end up going to jail for, you had these, there were these signs along the way, but you chose not to take the action, or you chose not to pay attention, or you chose not to listen, whatever that
Hmm.
was. And I've
Hmm.
just decided I don't want to wait for that anymore.
Yeah, I
If I
agree.
get it
And
early, I just want to deal with it now. Let's do it. Let's be proactive.
yes, yes, and talk about it. And
Hmm.
I just thought of one of my podcasts with Whitney Johnson at the beginning of this year. I think it was the beginning of this year. And she wrote a book called Disrupt Yourself. And the title of our podcast together was Will You Disrupt Yourself or Will You Be Disrupted? And it really
Ah,
is about being self reflective and understanding when you're finding dissatisfaction and finding ways to either address it now or gradually addressing it, just being aware of it.
hmm,
And I think a lot of people, they don't want to think about that. They It's too painful or uncomfortable, as you said before. And yeah, so I think your book is going to be really helpful to be able to separate that inspiration from action and
right.
then put it back together again.
Right. Well, and going back to my other book, I think that's what stopped people a lot of times from reaching out to those people that were in need, is that it was an uncomfortable situation. They were,
Mm-hmm.
it was uncomfortable to have that kind of discussion about something that was so tragic in their life. And so, my basic, no matter if I'm talking about that or something that's negative that you're fearful of, it's all about stepping through that fear and,
Mm-hmm.
not letting it, just doing it anyway, just
Mm-hmm.
taking a deep breath, realizing if you focus on the other person instead of your fear, you can step out in love.
Oh, that is perfect. That's perfect. Focusing on the other person instead of focusing on your fear and discomfort.
Right.
That's something that I've had to work on a lot because I get uncomfortable around emotional people, people who cry a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And over the last few years, probably about 3 or 4 years, I've started to really focus more on them and their needs and why are they emotional like that. And I need to be okay with that, because they're different from me, and that's what makes it so
Right.
uncomfortable. And especially, I was the vice president of our local women's leadership network, and then I was the president. And my president, while I was a vice president, is one of those people who cries when she speaks. She gets overwhelmed, and she's beautiful and emotional in such an approachable and authentic way. And that's how I had to see it. That's how I had to turn it around and say, why am I uncomfortable? First of all, this doesn't reflect on me in any way. This has nothing to do with me. And then the second part was looking around the room, and if other people were uncomfortable with it, finding ways to bridge that.
Yes.
But that's a hard one. And you're so right. That was a perfect quote. Focus on the other person. It's not about you.
Right. It's truly not. It's truly not. And that's what I always, you look at the situations, and if you look at come from a place of selflessness, service, instead of selfishness, you can switch it. You can make that switch.
And it's not that hard. That's Kimberly Davis talks about that a lot, about what impact do you want to have? Think external. And it's so much harder to be self-conscious if you're focused on what you want to bring to the person in front of you or the audience in front of you.
Right.
Yeah.
How may I serve?
Exactly. Sherrie, this has been such a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. And
I do.
For our listeners, I will have links to the conversation that we had in terms of connecting with Sherrie via her website, LinkedIn, Facebook, potentially. Also links to her book that she published a few years back about helping people through grief. And probably a couple of other links related to what we talked about today.
Right.
Maybe.
I do have a giveaway, for anybody who's interested. I have a sheet of 4 things not to do and say to a grieving person. Sometimes those things can help. Sometimes not just what to say, but what not to say. So if anybody wants to just contact me through my website, I'd be happy to send that to them.
That's wonderful. Thank you. That's such a gift. And if you have somebody, a friend or a relative that is going through grief right now, or, well, we all have grief of some sort, this is definitely a fantastic resource to make sure you're focused on them and not on yourself and your discomfort. So thank you. That's a great gift. Sherrie, thanks again. And we will definitely be in touch over the next few weeks. And I look forward to talking to you again.
I look forward to it too. I enjoyed this. Thank you so much. I'm so glad we connected.
Me too.
Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Share Them Will. Please visit my website for more podcast episodes, blog posts, and information about how I can help you develop and share your stories at elkinsconsulting.com.
Now listen to me, honey, while I say, how could you tell me that you're going away?